This is episode 67 of Art Talk, and today I have a special guest, world-renowned textile artist Susan Hensel. So let me introduce Susan. Susan received her BFA, Bachelor of Fine Art, from the University of Michigan with a double major in painting and sculpture and a concentration in ceramics. She has a history to date of more than 300 exhibitions, 35 of them solo, 20 plus garnering awards. In the coming 2 years, Susan has solo and two-person and group exhibitions scheduled in Ellicott, Bloomington, Hopkins, Duluth, and the Garrett Museum of Art. And in recent years, she has been awarded multiple grants and residencies through the Jerome Foundation. She is a multidisciplinary artist with a 50 plus years career. She combines a mixed media practice with embroidery across digital and manual platforms. She also makes sculptures and wall art using the colors and techniques of commercial embroidery. And these artworks are designed in the computer and stitched out on the computer-aided embroidery machine. Apart from her own studio, she also has a gallery. And the focus of the Susan Hensel Gallery is on compelling objects, meaningful use of materials, and engaging sculpture. It is a gallery where experimental ideas and works of the hand join to create unique sensory experiences. It's a gallery, workspace, that presents 5 to 6 shows per year in an intimate space. The gallery is, by the way, also represented on artsy.net. Welcome, Susan. I'm really happy to have you as my guest.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
And so, I have to be honest here. Textile is not something I know much about, to be honest. But I remember during my PhD research in the archives that in the 50s, it was the Museum of Amsterdam, then under Willem Sandberg, divided the museum in sections. And they took this from the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in America. So they had a division art, design, photography, drawings, etc. And then when Eddie de Wilde, the one I did research on, took over in 1963, he built on that principle. However, it became more and more difficult to make those specific distinctions. And for him, everything had to have an art aspect to it. So once, and nobody expected that, that was the fun thing, because he was all painting. He came back one day with the first ever textile sculpture of artist Jacoba Buick. Maybe you know her.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I have seen textile sculptures by Sheila Hicks and Dorothy Akpene Aminuke, to name a few. But that is totally different from what you make. Mm-hmm. So, how is your work unique to other textile art, and how much is your work walking the tightrope of design and art?
To be sure, textile art is mostly represented in design collections, which is fine if that's its intent. But there are people like Sheila Hicks, Marina Abramovic, and a bunch of other people, including Louise Bourgeois, for whom textiles were part of a sculptural practice. What I am doing that walks a line, and it really does, I am using as my primary medium a commercial process, but I am using it intuitively. Digital embroidery, for your listeners, is the stuff that's put on ball caps, sweatshirts. It's a home hobby thing too. A lot of teddy bears are stitched on various items. But what attracted me to it, and I was not expecting it at all, not at all, it was a total shock. I had attended the Minnesota State Fair, which is the largest state fair in the world, they tell me. It's huge. I had no idea. I'm a transplant to Minnesota from New York State and Michigan, which are much smaller in terms of how they do fairs. My idea of a fair was, a few cows, 4-H, some crops. Oh, this thing has also the tractors and fine art and ecology, all kinds of things. So it was quite something. And one year when I went, I decided to go to what I call the demonstration building, where new products are performed for people. So it's sort of like those TV sales pitches, you should get our knives, look how they cut a tomato, it's that kind of thing. But I rounded a corner after kind of giggling and shaking my head at a few of the other performers. I rounded a corner to a sea of sewing machines. And one of them, at least, if not more, but one caught my attention. No one was attending to it, and it was stitching out a Donald Duck in what was clearly an embroidery hoop, but it was being done on a machine that otherwise looked like a sewing machine. I didn't care that it was hands-free, and I sure didn't care it was Donald Duck. But the blue of his midi shirt was the most amazing blue I had ever seen in my life. It was the most ultramarine blue I had ever seen. I look at the background behind you and the blue, I'll call it a wimple across the woman. Take that and key it up. Take some of the yellow out and key it up to being the most amazing sapphire you have ever seen in your life. Except it was on Donald Duck. But I stood absolutely transfixed. The machine was making a lovely rhythmic noise, and as sewing machines do, but it's it's a little bit more when you're doing embroidery because it's a faster thing, not as much stop and go as when we're sewing. But it is that rhythmic thing, kind of like a locomotive, which is very soothing. I love that. And that color. And I knew right then and there I was in big trouble and that I had to do this. I had no idea what I was getting into because I'm not an aficionado of monograms and teddy bears on shirts. I certainly love embroidery, and like most women of my age, I'm in my 70s, I was taught to embroider as a kid, and I have hand embroidered on and off through the years, sometimes for fine art, more times just because it feels nice and it looks nice, and then I don't do anything with it, but I like doing it. But this was different. I knew in my guts that there was something that I could do with this that felt important. I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. And so I started applying for grants for the machine. That didn't come through. So I got a 5-year same as cash loan for the first machine. So I didn't have to pay any interest on it. I just paid for it out of cash flow and started to learn what to do, just even with commercial designs. And then I did get a grant for the first piece of software to design my own. And it confused the heck out of me. And I am techie. I've been working with computers just for administration stuff and for my artwork sometimes since the beginning, really? I mean, I had computer classes when I was 16 and I'm 73. So it's been with me a long time. I've never had the fear that a lot of people approach the machines with. They're just tools. They're just tools. And they were around my house growing up in various forms because my father was an engineer. and he
Okay.
loved
Yeah.
all this stuff.
Hmm.
So we had the first graphing calculator, which I never fell for. I don't like numbers very much.
You're not the only one.
No, they don't love me. They don't, I can operate them, but they don't have a lot of meaning for
No,
me.
no.
And they aren't good signifiers. So I wasn't afraid of the computer, but I didn't understand the structure. And I worked like crazy to fulfill the exhibition that was part of this grant. And I took classes on Craftsy. I found books from Europe, from the United States that were all really about designing those teddy bears.
Yeah.
But I had not understood what was involved in those designs. And they're fairly complex, actually. They have to be built in layers in order to develop stability. And there's all this stuff, stabilizers, which are different kinds of pellons and things. Because otherwise, if you don't put that underneath your design, and this can be a feature, of course, the fabric goes into a crinkle mess.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously can, as a sculptor, I can look at that and go, what could I do with that? And I have worked a little with that. But eventually, I fulfilled my grant. And then immediately afterwards, I bought better software. What I had gotten with the grant was the only Macintosh native software for digitizing. And it was one of the most unstable pieces of software I've ever used, because Macs don't usually crash.
No.
Not since the early days. I mean, there was a period of time when they did, but they don't usually crash. And it was crash and burn, right to the end. And by the time I fulfilled the grant, I knew I had to get a PC computer and the PC native software. And I work with Hatch software, which it's part of the Wilcom company, but it's very much like a cross between Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator.
Oh, okay.
For the design people out there, that will make some sense. Years ago, I took weekend intensive at a community college about Adobe Photoshop because there was something I just wasn't understanding, and it was the layer system.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're employing in these softwares for embroidery. And the other thing that you get to think about, and that simplifies it just tremendously in concept, is that geometrically you're just drawing straight lines.
Yeah.
Each stitch is 2 holes with a connector.
Yeah.
Basic geometry.
Yeah.
So you're working with the placement of those little lines, and you make them little and you can make curves, And within the software, they have developed some algorithms for you to do that, very much like Photoshop. You can build and select fills like you do in Photoshop.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can make them more or less transparent like you do in Photoshop. And you can begin to build them one on top of another. And as I began to understand that and understand the role of transparency and how to achieve it, I began to recognize unbelievable color interaction.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable. But it was beyond what I had expected. So, I went back and studied Albers and Itten. I love Itten. Itten's always made sense to me in terms of color studies. And I thought, no, it's more than that. So then I studied the thread. And just for my own enjoyment, I am a hand spinner. So I know how to make thread.
Oh,
I'm actually pretty expert. I can, even on a good day, spin cotton. And cotton's hard, so that's only on a good day I can do.
And you make that yourself, because that was a question I had.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't,
do you make the thread yourself, or is this
no, I
something you
don't.
have to?
No, you have to buy it. It's under so much tension.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the typical embroidery thread these days is polyester trilobal thread. Rayon used to be the standard, but the colors fade in rayon.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
rayon isn't very strong. It's beautiful. The sheen is gorgeous. It's a sheen much more akin to satin, so it's a smooth sheen. But the polyester has a sparkle to it. And I tried to figure out why it sparkled. It's an extruded thread. I love science. I can't help it. It's an extruded thread. And I found out it's called trilobal. So it has at least 3 plies, but these plies are extruded. And I learned more and more about it. And what I discovered was that it fundamentally has a triangular cross section. So if you think about how color works, and as a painter, you know this too,
Yeah.
it's a reflection off a surface, right?
Yeah.
And if your surface has 3 sides, it's going to reflect in at least 3 directions. And each reflection, depending on the angle, is a slightly different hue of the established hue. So if you have that ultramarine blue thread
Mhm.
of Donald's midi, what you're actually seeing is almost all the blues you can imagine across the spectrum at these angles off of all sides of the thread. And that's why it sparkles. And at that
Okay.
point, I said, oh my God, the rainbow, the prisms, it's really messing with our perception. And
Yeah.
I started working with joining the background color of the fabric with transparent gradients of contrasting colors to get the maximum amount of color interplay I could first on the flat surface. And then I began designing things to be folded, which makes that color interaction even more complex.
Yeah. And I mean, as a painter, especially with oil paint,
Yes, yeah,
you use transparent, and nowadays the pigments are more transparent than in the old days.
yeah,
You need to know how to handle it.
yeah,
But so in the painting behind me, I have that's layer over layer over layer,
yeah, yeah,
and also with transparent paints, and it gives a depth to it.
right. There's nothing
You
like the depth of
really, it's
oil
there's
paint.
nothing like it. Is that the same with
Yeah, yeah, it's a similar thing because I studied the old masters very deeply, and I studied how they ground the pigments and mix them with various noxious things, some of them really quite disgusting, to get what they
yeah
got,
yeah yeah yeah
so
yeah
that the light would pass through
yeah
and bounce off the canvas and
yeah
back out.
yeah.
So I had that basic concept, and I recognized it
Mm-hmm.
in the embroidery. I don't think it's as profound because I don't think it goes as deep
Mm-hmm.
as going through layers of linseed oil and stand
Yeah
oil, all
yeah
of those things. There's
yeah.
the optics are a little different,
Mm-hmm.
but you're working in a system like that,
Yeah.
and I'm applying within the software the layering. But what's kind of cool, unlike with painting, you can't go, oh, I want that lower layer to now be on top. In the computer, I can
You
change the
just shifted.
shift
Yeah
and see what it
yeah
looks like. And
yeah
that is utterly lovely.
yeah.
And then I start stitching it out. And I start with really a small idea. I don't very often have a completed object in mind. I might have
Mm-hmm.
a kind of sort of object. And I start from there and see what happens. So this is where my sculptor part really comes out. I work in modules. So I've got several machines. The machine I use the most is my Ricoma, which has an unbelievable 48-inch wide hoop. It's just unbelievable. I can stitch out modules that are up to about 42, 45 inches wide by 18 inches high. That's a large module.
Yeah.
Now, it can be pictorial, and I do that sometimes. But more often, I am designing things that will fold or scrunch or curve permanently.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm stitching them out, sometimes the user error happens. And on these machines, you have all of these needles and only one at a time stitches, because each needle really is like a separate sewing machine.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who want to dabble, don't be scared by 10 needles. They aren't all stitching at once. And don't be scared by all the dials outside.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those is just like the tension dial on your regular sewing machine. So it's just that it's visible. So that part's more straightforward than it looks. But you do have to tell the machine which needle to stitch with.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you're telling the machine, you tell it the wrong needle, and you thought you were going to stitch purple, and all of a sudden there's orange or something. And you have a choice to make at that point. Is orange looking cool? Or do I stop it now? And most of the time, especially if I don't notice till pretty far into the process, I'll let it finish.
But isn't it also something like some people have these colored tiles, and I remember that in the kitchen they put those tiles down. They just have a pile and they grab and they put them down. And I said, don't you use a system for this? No, he said, because if we start to make a system how the colors need to be, it gets so ugly. But when we have the tiles on a pile and we just take what's needed, it turns out beautiful.
I believe that, the randomness of it.
Yeah.
And I do allow for random to happen. I also allow myself to just stop the machine at any time if I feel like the design is the way I want it to look.
Okay.
Or if it's just gorgeous, and I might finish what I plan and then go back and do to the just gorgeous spot. And of course, you get things happen, things fall out of the machine. You get a hole, and then you have material.
Maybe it's a beautiful hole.
It might be. Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
You might need to stick a rock through it. There's so many possibilities. So I take these things off the machine and I start playing with them on my work table. And an iconic one for me that I shared with somebody a couple weeks ago is a piece on my website called Escape Capsule that I did in the depth of the pandemic. And I thought I was making a large textile accordion book because I had been working on a series of accordion book structures, some that were, 8 feet long, just because I could, just to see what would happen. And it was beautiful. It was a copper color kind of. I used orange and red thread on, I believe, a purple base, and what it says is copper. And I had it out on the work table. I had ironed in all the folds. It was a very simple direct fold, no curves. And I was playing with it, and I twirled it around, and I went, oh, I love that fan. And it has a tail, and it looks like it's a meteor. It's leaving the studio. Oh my God, I want to get out of here. It's an escape capsule from the pandemic. So those things happen. It had some pop-up kinds of things in it to give it dimension. And then I sewed it up with my little needle and thread, put in a few beads and things here and there, and then developed an armature for it.
Yeah,
So it can,
because that's what I've seen on your website. You create books, and I had like, oh yes, because I have a thing for pop-up books.
yeah, no, I have a deep
I'm into making them. But I looked online. Those are not the usual books we know, right? Not
No,
at all. I mean, I'm an avid reader, but how are we supposed to read your books?
well, if they're the handheld ones, I mean, I have a deep history in artist books, and that's actually what's in a lot of the collections I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, that's what's in the Museum of Modern Art, which I'm most proud of, and I have no idea how they got it. So whatever, but they have a couple of them. The way you read an artist book is in its totality.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's a full body read. A lot of my books have text in them, but the textile ones don't,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah.
And the text is minimal, and when I have it, and it helps direct your looking in a lot of ways. And it helps direct you to creating the story that you, as a human story making creature, are compelled to make. And when a book or a painting has no text or has no recognizable narrative, observational painting or drawing, which I do, but when it doesn't have that, you read it in different ways. I used to teach a workshop to non-artists where they would paint a large piece of paper on both sides, rip it up, and then bind it, and then find out what it said to them. And for those who were the most literary, it was difficult. And I remember sitting with someone who became a very close friend, and she said, how do I read this? And she even had a rip out where ripping it up, it got kind of trashed. I said, it's very simple, Barbara. You look at this. Wow, what do you see first? That yellow corner up there. Wow, what do you see next? The red. Where does your eye want to go next? Oh, to that rip up there where it's red behind there. I have to find out what happens. And I also ask them, how does it make you feel?
Yeah.
What are your responses?
Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation with my son over the weekend. He had just been to see a large Anselm Kiefer exhibition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if he had ever seen Anselm Kiefer before, not within his memory, anyways. And Anselm Kiefer, most of his stuff has a very powerful effect without there being human faces in most of it, or actions that you can recognize. But he said it was so heavy, Mom, and so dark. And
It is dark because he is exploring the history of Germany. It's a German artist, and the Second World War and everything that happened. Yeah, I've seen art of him, and also he had a book. It was made of lead.
Yeah, I asked him if any of the lead books were there, and he said no, but there were some lead floor pieces.
Yeah. But what I found very interesting in your book, what I saw online, that harmonica thing, kind of thing, I don't have to read like that. I thought like, oh, I would read it exactly the other way around.
And that's okay too, because it's kind of how things work, because it is a visual experience. I suspect you were seeing the most recent ones that I did from the wheelchair after my injury, because you have to do something that in between stage before you're allowed to do anything. And those were actually, some of them were done on blank pages and just visceral, and many of them were done from on top of old drawings or old paintings that I ripped down and worked back into. And it was done absolutely intuitively. And then I go back in with my compositional chops you know, and
Yeah.
I can say, yeah, compositionally, we need something more
Yeah.
over here
Yeah.
to help it settle down. But I applied those methods to the textiles too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen that. And then my question was, okay, I've seen these very intricate, because they're intricate pieces. They were, and that was in the art center, and they were on the wall in a
Oh yeah,
linear way,
really
and they're
tall one. Yeah.
crossed like that. And I had like, okay, you work with a computer
Yep.
and you use software, but do you also program yourself? I mean, if you know Joshua Davis, he's a friend of mine. He is he lives in New York, and he's someone who programs and then uses generative art.
Uh-huh.
Can you do that also? And then
Yeah.
create, because he has people who use his way of programming and create patchworks of it, because they create forms and colors,
Yeah.
and then they create a patchwork of it. But that's not what you do at all. You don't
No.
program.
No, I don't. I think my son could. He uses programming in his photography but he's a wonderful emerging photographer, and he uses programming to help him blend humongous panoramic things that express physical and physics concepts. It's just beyond me, but they're also gorgeous. And he does program to do that. No, I don't, but I do iterations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I definitely do iterations. And I was a little surprised when a new friend at an event just said, well, you love blue. And I thought, really, reds and oranges are my favorite colors. But I've been working with these iterations with blue for several years now, because I haven't completed, what it's telling me. So I keep on going back, and one of the lovely things about this digital world that I'm working in is, yeah, you save the designs, right? And you can upsize them, downsize them, copy one layer that you really like and take it into a new design.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways to generate in that way.
Yeah.
And they're definitely iterations. So I've got this whole body of work called Neotectonics, and it is dominantly blue. And it deals in the end with, underneath it all, with my concerns about climate change. Although I didn't know that when I started it. It was just,
okay.
wow, yeah, wow, this is really cool. I like how this looks.
Yeah.
And I make a lot of art, and I do it. My mentor, tells me, I think you make art to find out what you're thinking.
Okay, because that was another question I have.
Yeah.
Because your goal is to create an experience for the viewer,
Yes.
to overwhelms with color. That's obvious. Transcends the quotidian, encouraging one for even a few seconds to step outside of the narrative of the ego into a place of pure sensation.
Yeah.
So I presume that is your why you create what you create, right?
Yeah.
And how and what type of reactions do you receive of people who experience your art?
Oh, they are just wide-eyed. They stop, like I did in front of Donald Duck.
Because of the blue, not Donald Duck.
Because of the blue. They cannot figure out. They're confused and enamored by what they see, because it is somewhat confusing to the eye, because it looks different than weaving, than paint, than oil paint, acrylic. than watercolor. Watercolor, in a way, may come the closest because of the utter transparency of watercolor. And even when I explain to them how it works, they still go, and they go, but why does it look different when I walk by it?
Yeah.
And I said, because you're seeing the colors at a different angle yet again. And so the colors shift. And,
Yeah.
you know, the last big opening that I was physically able to attend, because your readers don't know, but I obliterated my leg on the ice this last winter, and I'm about halfway to recovered. But so I haven't been getting out and about a lot. And the last time was in Duluth, Minnesota, and I spent hours with people, walking them through, how does this work? I don't understand it. And they would just be,
Mm.
and it's individual, for some people, it's the intensity of a solid red piece. And I can visualize the piece. It overwhelms me because it's so rich. And for other people, it's the complexity of the layers, but and the pictorial nature of parts of it. But for the majority of people, it's that thing that happens when you move by the dimensional pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can so understand that. My last commission was a portrait, and my client showed it to her mom.
Yeah.
And she said, "Ah, the eyes are moving.
Yeah.
He is so alive.
Yeah.
Can you please leave it here?"
Yes, it would please
But
me too. Yes. Yes.
But that is what it does, Yeah. And then I have, like, when you have colors, you also have color psychology.
Yeah.
That way how color communicates.
Mhm.
And that can be on a different level, but you can have color plays a huge role in your work.
Yes.
And also with embroidery, do you work towards contrast, so
Yeah.
consciously towards contrast, harmony, cold, warm?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. My favorite little tool.
Oh yeah.
I never considered myself a natural colorist. What always moved me in my practice all through this 50 years really was form, even when I was working flat. When I draw the human figure, I kind of draw it from the inside out. I'm not one of those people who generally draws an outline and then fills it in.
No.
No, I think it's a horrible way to draw. But I'm real engaged with the liveliness of the line, and then how the line helps exhibit three-dimensionality, and then whatever fills I do, how they do the dimensionality and the emotion of the figure. That's what's important to me. So it's more like from the inside out, like a sculptor,
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
that is sculpturing. I mean,
Yeah.
The good sculptors who were able to make sculptures by hand and not 3D printing, but really the real deal, they were excellent portrait and figure drawers also.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, I've seen them and I had like, gee, they're so good, because they already see it in a 3D way.
Yeah. And it's funny. I remember reading, Michelangelo always said that he could see the figure in the sculpture.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's myth. It doesn't matter. It's a phenomenal story, and Lord knows his drawings were amazing. I've always been much more of an additive sculptor. I'm much more likely to build things.
Yeah. But that is maybe the nature of your work, right? Because that is, I had like, okay, you have your machines and they are this big, that big, smaller, and you have
Yeah.
one is huge, but then I can also imagine that you stitch things together that come from different machines to
Yeah.
create that sculpture that way.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I'm essentially in the machines, I'm creating the materials
Yeah,
that I will build with.
that is the rock
Yeah,
you
yeah,
need.
that's my rock essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I think I build things partly because I cannot entirely see them in 3D, but I want to see them.
Hmm.
That's one of the motivators, especially when I'm combining wood and things. I'll go, oh, but I want to see what that looks like, and I'll try to draw it, and my imagination begins to fall off at a
Hmm.
certain point. You have to get a certain amount of perspective, and then I can't quite project what the effect is going to be in the next step. I go, okay, fine, you just have to build it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I
yeah.
love to build things. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It's exciting to do that
It is. And I love tools.
because then you keep the wonder.
Uh-huh. What
And I think
don't you
that's one of
think
the
yeah,
important
isn't it the
things.
beauty?
And
Yeah,
it's
it's
playing. And so how much does playing plays a part in your art practice? Because I've seen your work online in your online gallery and it looks very playful.
it is, yeah. I mean, it's hard work, of course. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff you have to do, but for an art career, probably almost the least of it, unless you are organized enough and successful enough to have a team to
Mm.
take care of
Hmm.
things, right? You have to do the administrative stuff. You have to keep track of it. You have to photograph it. Blah, blah, blah. And that takes a tremendous amount of time. But there is a huge aspect of play. There's a joy in
Mm.
manipulating the materials and seeing what happens. And I lose myself.
Yeah.
I can get out of my way very quickly. Sometimes I have to use music to get myself out of the way. I often will have a soundtrack for a series. That's not unusual. But the other part just is when I get going and digitizing, really, which surprises me, I lose time
Yeah, then you're
when
in flow. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
get in flow very quickly there because I find it so exciting to move these layers around and see what they look like because I can put um, a reasonable rendition of the colors I'm going to use in the computer. Yeah, it won't really show three dimensionality. It kind of does, it kind of
Mm-hmm.
doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
You won't get the same interaction. But it's exciting to see what happens if I take this shape, put it on top of that shape. Oh, wait, no, I want that underneath that shape. And what if I brought this one over here and, oh, all the
Yeah.
colors. If I'm going to be stitching on a purple cloth, I can make my background purple in the computer. I can't get as deep a purple, but I could get an idea
Mm.
of how it's going to work. Am I going to get the vibration that I want?
Yeah.
You know, um, that is play, and I get utterly lost. And I get utterly lost in the act of drawing too.
Mm. Yeah.
Totally lost. And my drawings are utterly organic. They're a real contrast to what I do with the machinery. I mean, the machinery definitely lends itself to hard geometry. But I am continually investigating how to soften that, how to
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
What are the ways that I can push this? And that's where the antique pipe molds started showing up. The wood pieces, those are antique molds, and it was like, ooh, I could make something that snuggled in there, and the wood begins to soften things. And some of the wood is original woodworking, the wayfinding devices. which have deep personal meaning for me because we were all stuck in the pandemic and political upheaval all over the world. And it's like, how are we going to find our way? Maybe one of these little things. Oh,
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah.
They're pretty, and
Yeah.
you can imagine using them to find your way.
Yeah. And what
Would
was the
it work?
reason? What was
Would
the reason you created your own gallery space? And are those 5, 6 shows a year all your work?
that has shifted over the years. I moved to Minneapolis 20 years ago, and I had worked with other people owning artist-run spaces for a number of years. And two things came to the front. I wasn't done curating. I really do enjoy curating and putting on shows, and I actually enjoy marketing. It's a lot of fun, and I enjoy writing. But it can take you over. I will tell you that. And I also decided to continue because I was moving to a town where I knew 2 other people. And I needed to meet more artists. I needed to meet people. And I knew that this would be a way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I did that in person for 9 or 10 years. And I decided at that point that I needed to fulfill my obligations to my artists because I feel very responsible to the artists that I represent, but I needed to return to the studio. And so I backed off from the 5 to 6 shows in person. And that building that is just about to be sold has capacious shop windows. You can stand up in them, turn around, and I would put up exhibitions in there for local artists. And I returned to my studio work. And then during the pandemic, I decided to return to curating, but to do it through the Artsy website.
Yeah.
And I represent 4 or 5 people at this point from the Midwestern states of the United States, because we don't get seen very often. Minneapolis is an art city, but it still gets a little bit dropped off the awareness screen. And so I decided that I wanted to do this again. And now with this, it was a very serious injury. It's a year of recovery injury. I'm debating how much longer I'll be continuing the artsy thing. But here's one of the things I really want to share with your people. And it does have to do with relationships, because I am still exhibiting pretty widely. I think I'm in 4 shows at the moment, one of which is in a museum. And I haven't made any of that textile art for at least 6 months because I cannot.
Yeah.
But the reason that I am able to keep exhibiting like this is not only were some of them put in motion before the injury, but also I had these relationships over this time period.
Yeah.
And I'm not an extrovert. I'm not. I do the relationships better through coincidental contact, through online contacts like this. I've developed an astonishing number of contacts during the pandemic. It was amazing, actually.
Yeah.
What I picked up, and collaborations. I'm in a collaboration right now of people that I met through being part of the International Sculpture Center professional level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exposing yourself, not necessarily with intent. It's just showing up where you can make yourself show up.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us are quite introverted as artists. and it's very difficult to show up for many of us. I find it, my own openings, I don't have too much trouble with, but showing up to other openings, it's like going to a party where you know nobody, and it's very difficult for me. And now I have the excuse that I have a walker and it's hard to get around, and it's a
Yeah.
great excuse. It's not what I would have chosen, but
what you say is, and that is, I think, also the last question of our conversation. With 50 years experience behind you, what's the one tip you can give emerging artists? And you say, build relationships, right?
Yep, and show up. Just show up,
And
whatever
show
that
up.
means.
Yeah.
Even though I am not very productive right now, I show up in the studio every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not setting my alarm anymore unless I have a really early appointment, and I'm not sleeping in late because I'm old. I don't sleep in late. I don't know how, but yeah, I was in the studio by 10 o'clock today. And that's always been kind of my goal, has been to get to the studio at 10.
Yeah.
And I've moved a month ago into this new studio and new home, and you're seeing roughly a third of the studio behind me. And this is the part that is totally functional right now, and that's the drawing studio and assembly studio.
Mm-hmm.
And the machines are in their own room, and they're ready to go. I just don't need to get them going yet, because the in-between room, the wood shop, oh my, that's got a long ways to go. We'll get that together in the coming month.
Yeah.
But so I'm getting settled in, and the rhythm is starting up again. There's enough put away and enough available that I can do a work day. So
that's great. Yeah, show up.
Show up and have a dedicated space. And it doesn't have to be big like mine. It can be the corner of your kitchen. I don't care where it is, but it's yours.
Yeah.
And you don't put the stuff away except maybe for Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, for the big events. It's your space.
Yeah.
And take yourself seriously. It's really important what we do, whether we're exhibiting artists or not.
Yeah.
It is really important. It's important for us individually, and it's important for the world. This is something that humans have done since time immemorial, and it's part of being human.
Absolutely. And we bring the beauty in the lives of other people and uplift them, right?
Yeah.
Take them out of the ego for a moment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Just a moment. And even 30 seconds is enough for you to feel refreshed.
Yeah. But that is so true, because that's tested. And that's why people still flock to museums.
I agree.
And also with paintings, they want to see the brushstrokes and they feel the energy that comes from the artist in the work. And and that is what is attractive. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Look at the joy on your face. I mean, isn't it wonderful?
Yeah. It is my joy. It is my happy space. Yeah. As soon as I paint, I can't talk anymore. Also, I can't verbally express myself. As soon as I'm in flow, I can't. I try, because a friend of mine called me, "You're not as talkative today." I'm sorry, but I'm painting, and then I'm sorry, but I can't really. I can't. It doesn't work. Yeah.
Well, some of my close friends know that they haven't heard from me in a while. I must be really building things.
Yeah.
It's when I'm building, especially, that it's kind of like, oh, I'm so in my happy place.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for a lovely conversation.
Oh, you bet.
And where can people find you? Because I will put that in the show notes.
Well, they can go to some of the places you went. You would go to my website, which is susanhenselprojects.com. That's my personal artwork. And then I would recommend that you go to susanhenselgallery.com and follow the links. That'll take you out to Artsy and to some of the shows that I just simply did online there
Mhm.
during the pandemic, because I just figure the work's got to get out there, even
Mm.
when we can't get out there. And then Google me, you'll find me. Google
Yeah.
me. Yeah, find me on YouTube.
I will definitely put a bunch of links there. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's much to see. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I've been at this a heck of a long time. So, and I
But
don't plan
thank you
to stop.
so
So
much. It was really a pleasure to talk with you. And I learned so much again about something, an art form that I really have never looked into. And yeah,
you, you just
I
didn't
always
know
love to learn
Donald
new
Duck.
things. And it started with Donald Duck. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's so
yeah,
funny. But
yeah.
well, it didn't. It started with color.
It did. It did.
It
Yeah,
started with color. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But that just remarkable color.
yeah,
Still makes me go, just
exactly.
makes my heart beat faster.
It does. Everyone should surround himself or herself with colors. Definitely.
I agree.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Karen.
You're
It's
so
been a pleasure.
welcome. It
Yeah.
was really a joy to talk with you.
Thank you. Mine as
Okay.
well.